Hi there. How are you going so far with this textbook and flipped learning? I hope you're finding the textbook interesting and flipped learning effective. This week, we are continuing with how to teach the skills of language and moving on to speaking. There are different ideas regarding how to teach speaking, and some teachers, unfortunately, even neglect it in their regular lessons. However, being able to speak fluently in English is the main goal of most students. When we talk about real communication, we mean being able to spontaneously produce and understand culturally appropriate language. So let's have a look at a few ideas about how to do this. Here is our schedule for this week. As you can see, there are a lot of similarities between this week and last week. The structure of these videos will be basically the same, with some theories about teaching the skill, general ideas, your ideas for activities, and assessing the skill. So let's do it. Like last week, I would like you to share your ideas about how you improve your language skills. So how do you do it? In your regular English studies, what do you do to improve your speaking skills? Be ready to share your ways of studying in class. We start off with a joke, which is actually pretty good. Speaking doesn't always go as we expect, especially in real-life conversations. As we can see in the two examples on page 111, negotiation is vital in successful conversations. The first examples show a conversation from a typical textbook. The second conversation shows what an actual conversation might be like. For conversations to be successful, we need to use gestures, facial expressions, tone of voice, and so on. Remember, if we want to achieve successful communication, we need to go beyond what we can see and hear and look at what we can't see and hear, just like Adrian Juncken. True communication is unpredictable. Therefore, the conversations we see in many textbooks are not authentic. This reminds me of my thought processes when assessing my students. How can you tell if a student is good at English? In my opinion, you don't look at what the students do when they know what to do or say. You look at what students do when they don't know what to do or say. That can tell us whether our students are really achieving a high level of English. What do you think? How do you tell if someone is good at speaking English? We saw a little humor at the beginning of this part of the textbook. I'd like to finish this slide off by introducing a short video, which is one of my favorite skits related to language. Scan the QR code and see what you think. It's pretty obvious that speaking is essential in communication. You don't need me to tell you that. Yet many language instructors tend to avoid adding speaking components to their lessons. Why is this? What is so difficult about teaching speaking? Our textbook gives us a few ideas, and you should be aware of these when you are concentrating on helping your students improve their speaking skills. First, as we discussed above, it is difficult to create authentic situations in the classroom. We can choose the people we talk to and the topics we talk about. Many questions used by teachers in the classroom are display questions, that is, questions to which the teachers already know the answers. We can see an example of this and a better way of asking questions in the interactions on page 113. Although it is not always possible, as much as possible, we want to use questions like the second interaction. Furthermore, there are various registers or levels of formality in language. To make our speaking practice authentic, we need to consider the roles of each person. Second, we have the common belief that when we speak, we must not make any errors. However, the majority of language learning theories actually see mistakes as beneficial for learning. It is often through our mistakes that we learn best. Also, anxiety is a major issue here. Teachers feel anxious when their students don't speak enough, and even with their own language proficiency. Teachers especially have strong feelings of anxiety when students don't immediately answer. The suggestion by Judith Schrum, halfway down the second paragraph on page 116, is fantastic and mirrors my own thoughts about waiting. Sometimes we want to say the answer when our students are thinking. However, you need to bite your tongue, be patient, and give your students time to come up with their answers. Finally, when it comes to beliefs about speaking, many language instructors ignore the washback effect. The washback effect is the effect testing has on students' study habits. So if you want your students to have a positive attitude towards speaking English, you need to put a heavy weighting on this skill in regular tests. Having an understanding of all these issues that come with teaching speaking will help you provide more effective lessons for your students. Now let's have a look at the process of how one's speaking ability develops. Next, we look at the development of speaking ability. Note that although this seems similar to the order we saw in Chapter 4, it is different. We know that humans do not suddenly become fluent speakers. There is a process with which this development occurs. First, beginner students tend to simplify and use reduced redundancy. So students might say, "I know eat broccoli," which then later develops into "I not eat broccoli," and finally, "I don't eat broccoli." This shows the existence of simplified stages of learning. It's important to remember that these mistakes are not made consciously, and they are simply part of the natural process of learning languages. The second step is the use of formulaic language. This is where learners memorize set phrases and use them in conversations. This level is especially useful for allowing speakers of lower proficiency to participate in communication, despite their having a limited amount of second language knowledge. Next, we have the acquisition sequence. Again, we see the name Krashen. I told you it was an important name to remember. Krashen presented an order in which humans appear to learn second languages. You can find this on page 118. If we know this order, it helps us when it comes to creating syllabi and textbooks, if you are interested in that. It also helps when we think about the zone of proximal development, the ZPD, right? And levels of language we can encourage and expect our students to achieve. Knowing this order can help us in teaching, especially when it comes to thinking about the accuracy of what students are saying. Knowing this order can help make the decisions regarding feedback when our students use grammar incorrectly. We can distinguish between errors, mistakes, and slips of the tongue. By asking ourselves, has this student used this grammar incorrectly before? Should he or she know it? We can decide the best way to fix the problematic speech by our students. As we will do in each of our classes about individual language skills, I would like you to create your own original activity to use in class. There are plenty of ideas on pages 120 to 128. This week, because we are discussing speaking, let's work on developing an activity or task to help our students improve their speaking skills. I would like you to focus on having your students improve their understanding and confidence in using countable and non-countable nouns, with an activity based on the difference between how many and how much. Make sure you prepare a handout and have your explanation of which stage of the development of speaking ability that we saw in the previous slide your activity focuses on. To help you develop your activity, make sure you read through the tips on page 120 to 123. These suggestions will help you create effective activities to use in your classes. As I mentioned earlier, assessing speaking is important due to the washback effect. However, it is not easy. You have probably heard of TOEFL, which includes measurements of speaking ability, but there is also the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, which also has clear guidelines for levels of speaking. When evaluating speaking, the use of a rubric is vital. A good rubric will guide students in their preparation, as well as give clear feedback after they have been evaluated. Self-evaluation or self-assessment is also very useful, and I often use peer assessment to encourage students to become more aware of the different aspects of speaking. Whatever you choose to do, thinking about the effects your evaluation style has on students' attitudes to speaking, that is, the washback effect, will go a long way to increasing the effectiveness of your instruction. Well, that's it for this week. If I were to choose one key word about teaching speaking, I would probably say spontaneous. If we can get our students to a level when they are able to handle spontaneous conversations with relative ease, we have done a pretty good job. Alright, so make sure you are ready for our usual quiz, have your ideas and opinions set to go, and I'll see you in class.